Thanks for everyone for coming. I think if this session started with this question of what cartography is, I think our question more is what can cartography do? And one way we've done this, or it's led us down this path of making these animations of relational spaces, which is very much informed by my background as a visual artist, so interesting connections, and also our interest in building tools to make other imaginative geographies possible. So before we get into the sort of animations, we're going to describe some of the theoretical background that informs how we got to this place.
Right, so very briefly, we're interested in posing questions such as we want to ask what if GIS and cartographic infrastructure actually centered epistemological and ontological commitments that would motivate contemporary human geography, or perhaps more broadly, the interpretive social sciences, arts, and humanities. And what we mean by that can be many different things.
Yeah, and so we're inspired by kind of all these spatial theories in human geography, and thinking about what it would mean to really bring these theories into cartographic practices. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of some of the theories we're thinking about, but human geographers thinking about space as relational, always produced through human and non-human relations, always dynamic, so it's always in flux, always changing. It's understood in this situated perspective, so space changes for the viewer in different ways. It's paradoxical in Gillian Rose's terms. Inside and outside are mutually exclusive, she writes. The power geometries of Doreen Massey, the spatialized blackness that Rashad Shabazz talks about, wormholes that Eric Shepard has written about, bringing distant places close together, vibrant materialities of Jane Bennett, queer spaces of Jack Giesking, and the geographical imaginations of people like Derek Gregory and others. So what does it mean for us to think really deeply about what these theories might provide cartography?
And we look at some of our existing tool chains, and as powerful as they are, we notice that, at least in GIS, a lot of space is, for the most part, often reduced to a mostly flat surface that kind of pre-exists the data. And certainly the coordinate systems are great evidence of that. And those are what we then locate various sorts of phenomena in. So people talk about location being key to GIS and geography, but I think that's a historical path dependency, perhaps, when we're showing our phenomena as being located within these pre-existing coordinate systems. So what happens, though, if phenomena and space and viewer are not assumed to be independent?
And we just wanted to show the background here. And so this is one result of this tool we've built called Enfolding. And this talk is all about different things we might build to show some of these different sorts of spaces. And certainly in building tools, we're inspired by people who are build labs that are into engaging with the materialities of these objects as a mode of critique. So critique not being sort of this thing outside of the object, but being wrapped up within it. So Tara McPherson writes about the Vectors Lab at USC, which is really an effort to span different issues in humanities, arts, and computation. So in her book, Feminists in a Software Lab, she writes, there are other materials we might engage, other agencies to explore that exist beyond the discursive realm, agencies that might move us toward new alliances and practices. And so in our case, we're engaging with computation to build these new tools to think about what kind of alliances we might make between, GIS and space, and how all these concepts, constitute each other. And so if we engage with GIS in a way to change it, we're also changing how we engage with space, and vice versa.
So we're going to engage in a little bit of not just wordplay, but perhaps play in concepts, play in materials, play in code. And we were interested in what happens if we move beyond capital GIS to perhaps a broader notion of a geographical imagination system, so a GIS in the lowercase. And in that case, perhaps GIS might encourage the interpretive construction, collision, and collaging of not only absolute, but also relational spaces. And so in this sense, I think perhaps GIS, in lowercase sense, might be a superset of the more restrictive forms of geographic information systems in the capital. So we don't want to throw those out, but those are applicable when you have certain very restrictive assumptions hold about ontology and the nature of the map. So I actually think in this, we do take a lot of inspiration from many authors in the past, especially in the early days of the quantitative and computational revolution. So Waldo Tobler, in his dissertation, for example, the first abstract, I believe, he writes, "The measuring rod of the geodesist or surveyor is less relevant to social behavior in a spatial context than is scaling of distances in temporal or monetary units." Likewise, David Harvey, in Explanation in Geography, wrote, "There is a considerable probability that socioeconomic spatial interaction is best mapped into a non-Euclidean geometry." And Anne Buttimer, in 1976, wrote that describing space merely in terms of its Euclidean geometry is an inadequate approach to the understanding of human experience. So those are all recognized early in quantitative and computational geography, and I think they're the types of sentiments that blur the boundaries between this narrower GIS in the capital sense and this broader realm of yet to be often imagined or implemented lowercase GIS imagination type systems. So this is an example that Tobler created in the 60s called his World Ocean Distances Map. And it's looking at space among, I think, 48 ports around the world in terms of the shipping time, or shipping distance, not their geodesics on a sphere. Or there have been other efforts since then, in this case looking at time-space compression in Japan. Again, time as the metric. And as the high-speed rails evolve, you see differential compression of different places with respect to each other. And similarly, there are these other sorts of efforts ongoing now. In this case, it's the work of a graduate student whose efforts we really admire in dream cartographies. Christina, apologies for my mispronunciation, but Iasevscu-Enescu. And her work is attempting to bring together a variety of spaces that perhaps might be representative of a dreamscape. And instead of having this at the sort of margins of cartography as a sort of special case, what if these sorts of things were equally central to the cartographic enterprise? And what if interpretation and various sorts of perspectival efforts were actually key to space itself? With these sorts of ideas in mind, we have set out to create various other prototypes for cartographic work.
So one prototype we've built is what we call Enfolding, which is this web tool that we're trying to make accessible to geographers and cartographers who might not have strong technical backgrounds. So we've built it as a web app that you can use. This link will come up a couple times. And what it allows you to do is bring a map or image into here and change measures of distance. So moving away from sort of Euclidean notions of distance. This could be travel times, it could be emotional distances. It's kind of an agnostic tool in terms of what the map maker wants to create and imagine. And so if you go to that link, you can go online and sort of try this out. Here we're adding 2 points on the map and changing this Euclidean distance, and then seeing how this map is re-rendered as folded or pinched in that place. And this is in the 3D mode, and there's also a 2-dimensional mode, which is more akin to some of the older experiments in quantitative geography. And so the main thing we want to show today are these animated maps, and I want to run through some reasons we would do animations of these relational spaces. And so one way, and this is sort of a remake of these of the Japan transit maps, is to show the changing nature of relations. And all these maps are Blender hillshades, because I've heard you all are into that stuff. So we see the island of Japan changing shape as we're imagining that the rail lines make distant places closer together once a high-speed rail comes in. And so these are outputted from our Enfolding program and then brought into Blender to do these animations. The second map and second reason we might do animations of relational spaces is to really put forth this idea that space is a situated and expressive proposition. So it kind of undermines this objectivity of the map. They're very clearly, someone's creative expression of what this phenomena is. And so here's me imagining riding bikes in a very mountainous place in the Alps and thinking about how the terrain changes according to all these kind of personal factors of difficulty, going uphill, downhill, all these things. So that's that map. And, it's great to be at NACIS because there's so much that has sort of inspired these sort of ways of thinking of mapping. One thing that's been inspirational has been Daniel Huffman's Lake Michigan Unfurled, when he took the outline of Lake Michigan and flattened it into a straight line to think about what the experience of walking around the lake might be. And so that's his map at the bottom. Here is Luke in Enfolding, changing Lake Michigan into a flattened line. And here's my attempts. They're still rough to kind of make that into an animation. So the third reason we might animate these spaces is to develop a deeper understanding of the spatial relations that constitute this figure. So what does it look like when Daniel Huffman's map is unfurled? If we animate that, we might understand something about those structures. And finally, the fourth reason we came up with is animations really highlight the vibrancy of space. Space is dynamic, always changing, and so this is sort of an experiment in showing this weird morphing plastic space that changes over time. But again, the tools we're building, we hope, are open to the creative possibilities of the people who use them. And so hopefully there's all kinds of other reasons you would want to make relational, dynamic, animated map spaces. And so it's been really instructive coming to NACIS and showing this as it progresses and getting people's feedback, and then reincorporating that into the tools we built.
So in some ways, this project's been on a slow burn, but we've benefited recently in facilitating the idea that some of the rest of you all might be able to take it and move it in directions we haven't seen it yet. We're very grateful to Lindsay Funk at Kentucky, who has actually looked at the project and written some tutorials. So you can actually go and hopefully decipher how to use this thing now and do some of these things yourself and take work in interesting directions. And we'd certainly be more than happy to help you in that process, and thrilled to see what you might do with these things as we evolve them further. So generally speaking, we're just really interested in the types of questions like what sort of cartographic technologies can we have out there for what sorts of knowledges and politics. So many have supported us in this, and yes, thanks to them, and thanks to you all for your interest and attention today.